The voice carried across the autumn air like frost on glass. Professional, measured, but wrong in ways that made your skin crawl. "Mr. Washington? May I ask your purpose at this hour?" Malik Washington sat motionless behind the wheel of his matte black Bentley, the leather seats still warm from the 14-hour flight that had carried him across 3 time zones and back to what should have been sanctuary. His fingers tightened imperceptibly around the steering wheel as the words registered. Not the content, but the tone. The subtle shift from recognition to interrogation that he'd learned to decode before he could legally vote. Through the windshield, the wrought iron gates of his estate stretched upward like ancient sentries, their intricate scrollwork catching the late afternoon light. These gates had welcomed him home 1,000 times before. Today they remained closed. Darius Mitchell stood at the security checkpoint, clipboard in hand, his uniform pressed and pristine despite the November chill. 6 feet 2 inches of authority wrapped in navy blue fabric, with 20 years of private security experience etched into the lines around his eyes. Malik had hired him personally 3 years ago, trusted him with his family's safety, his peace of mind, his children's nighttime fears about strangers in dark corners. Now Darius was looking at him like he was the stranger. "I'm sorry," Malik said, his voice carrying the edge that came from too many meetings, too much coffee, and too little patience. "Did you just ask me my purpose? At my own home?" The words hung between them like smoke from a snuffed candle. Behind Darius, 2 junior guards shifted uncomfortably, their hands hovering near radio clips as if waiting for instructions that weren't coming. One of them, Jackson, barely 25, still eager to please, stepped forward slightly before catching himself, caught between protocol and common sense. Darius cleared his throat, the sound sharp against the whisper of wind through bare oak branches. "Sir, we've received updated security protocols regarding verification procedures. Enhanced measures." Malik repeated the words slowly, tasting their bitter flavor. His mind flashed to boardrooms where those same phrases had been code for something else entirely. Enhanced oversight, enhanced scrutiny, enhanced ways to make you prove you belonged in spaces you'd built with your own hands. He pressed the window down further, letting the cool air fill the vehicle's silence. The familiar scents of his property drifted in, honeysuckle from the garden his wife had planted, the faint metallic tang of the fountain that never quite worked properly, home in 1,000 small details. Everything exactly as he'd left it 2 weeks ago, except for the man blocking his path. "Darius," he said, keeping his voice level, professional. "I flew 16 hours to get here. My luggage is in the back seat. My house key is in my pocket, and you're asking me to verify my identity at gates that have my family crest embedded in the metalwork." Something flickered across Darius's face, recognition maybe, or the dawning awareness that he was walking on ground that wouldn't support his weight. But he didn't step aside. Instead, he straightened, shoulders squaring with the kind of resolve that comes from following orders rather than following sense. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Washington, but I'm required to follow all security protocols without exception. If you could just provide some form of identification." The request landed like a slap. Not because it was unreasonable. Malik had shown ID in countless airports, hotels, and office buildings over the past 2 weeks. But because in all those places, he'd been a visitor. Here, behind these gates, surrounded by gardens he'd personally chosen and architectural details he'd personally approved, he was being asked to prove he existed. Malik's hands found the gear shift, muscle memory preparing to reverse, to drive away, to find a hotel room and deal with this administrative confusion in the morning. But something deeper, older, rooted in decades of similar moments, kept him planted in place. This wasn't confusion. This was recognition wearing the mask of procedure. "My identification," he said quietly, "is that I'm sitting in my driveway, at my house, having this conversation with my employee." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. In the distance, a delivery truck rumbled past on the main road, its driver probably wondering why a Bentley was idling outside closed gates like some kind of modern art installation. The autumn sun slanted lower, painting everything in shades of gold that should have been beautiful but felt tainted now, witnessed. Before we continue with what happened next, I want you to think about this. Have you ever been questioned in a place where you completely belonged? Drop your city or country in the comments and let me know. This story hits different when you've lived it yourself. Darius shifted his weight from foot to foot, the clipboard now trembling slightly in his grip. The updated instructions came down from corporate this morning, sir. Enhanced verification for all vehicle entries during high alert periods. High alert periods? Malik's voice dropped an octave, the tone he reserved for board meetings when quarterly projections came in below expectations. What exactly are we on high alert for, Darius? The question hung in the air like a challenge nobody wanted to accept. Jackson, the younger guard, glanced toward the security booth as if salvation might emerge from behind its tinted windows. His partner, Rodriguez, studied his boots with sudden fascination, hands clasped behind his back in a parade rest that looked more like surrender. Well, sir, there have been reports of suspicious activity in the neighborhood, individuals attempting unauthorized access to residential properties. Darius's voice gained momentum as he spoke, finding refuge in the rhythm of official language. Corporate-mandated enhanced screening protocols for all entry points until further notice. Malik felt something cold settle in his chest, recognition dressed up as procedure, bias wearing the uniform of policy. He'd been here before, in different clothes, different cars, different decades, but the script never changed. Only the costumes got better. Suspicious individuals, he repeated, letting the words roll around his mouth like broken glass. And what exactly makes someone suspicious, Darius? The security chief's jaw worked silently for a moment, with searching for words that wouldn't damn him. Behind him, Jackson's radio crackled with static, some dispatch call about a false alarm at the north entrance. Normal security business, the kind of routine chatter that proved the system was working exactly as designed, just not for everyone. Anyone who doesn't follow standard entry protocols, Darius finally managed. Proper identification, pre-approved vehicle clearance, advance notification of arrival times. Pre-approved vehicle clearance. Malik's fingers drummed against the steering wheel, a habit he'd developed during late-night study sessions at Northwestern when the weight of being the only black face in most rooms had pressed down like a physical thing. For my own car, at my own house. The memory surfaced without warning, sharp and immediate as broken skin. 11 years old, standing outside Riverside Elementary after staying late for chess club practice. His mother's ancient Buick pulling up to the curb, engine knocking like an irregular heartbeat. Mrs. Henderson, the principal, emerging from the building with her purse clutched tight against her chest. "Excuse me, you can't park there. That's for school personnel only." His mother, still in her hospital scrubs from the double shift at Cook Memorial, stepping out of the car with dignity that cost her everything. "I'm here to pick up my son." "Your son?" The surprise in Mrs. Henderson's voice had cut deeper than any insult, as if the idea of him belonging to anyone, anywhere, was fundamentally impossible to process. "Sir?" Darius's voice pulled him back to the present, to gates that should open and guards who should remember. "I'm going to need to see some identification." The words hit like an old wound reopening. Malik felt his shoulders straighten, his spine finding that steel rod his father had taught him to summon when the world tried to make him smaller than he was. "Stand up straight, son. Make them look up to see you, even when they're trying to look down." "You want identification?" Malik's voice carried a new edge, sharp enough to draw blood. "Fine." He reached into his jacket pocket, movements deliberate and controlled, watching as Jackson's hand instinctively moved toward his radio. The reaction wasn't lost on him. The automatic assumption of threat, the readiness for escalation, the way his simple gesture had transformed from routine compliance into potential danger. His business cards were European leather, embossed with raised lettering that caught the light. He held one out the window, close enough for Darius to read the gold foil text. Malik Washington, Chief Executive Officer, Washington Enterprises. Chairman, Digital Innovation Fund. Board Member, Metropolitan Development Council. Darius took the card, examined it with the intensity of a bank teller checking for counterfeits. "This doesn't show your residential address, Mr. Washington, because it's a business card, not a driver's license." The patience was bleeding out of Malik's voice like air from a punctured tire. How long have you worked here, Darius? 3 years? 4. 3 years, sir. 3 years of opening these gates when I come home. 3 years of morning runs where you wave from the checkpoint. 3 years of Christmas bonuses and birthday cards for your daughter. And today, you need enhanced verification to confirm I live in my own house. Rodriguez cleared his throat, a sound like gravel shifting. Maybe we should call the main office, get some clarification on the protocols. No. Darius cut him off, but the word came out too sharp, too quick. The kind of reflex that exposed more than it concealed. We follow procedure as written, no exceptions. The finality in his voice crystallized everything Malik had been feeling into something harder, more focused. This wasn't about protocols or corporate mandates or neighborhood security. This was about a black man in casual clothes driving an expensive car, and the fundamental inability of some people to reconcile those two facts. I demand that you let me in immediately. The words came out with the force of accumulated decades, every slight and assumption and moment of having to prove his right to exist in spaces others took for granted. This is not a request, Darius. This is not a negotiation. Open the gates. The silence that followed was loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Jackson's hand hovered near his radio, waiting for signals that weren't coming. Rodriguez stared at the ground, like he was trying to memorize the pattern of autumn leaves scattered across the pavement. And Darius stood frozen, caught between the authority he thought he held and the reality of who was actually in charge. If you believe that every person deserves dignity regardless of how they're dressed or what they look like, hit that like button right now. Because what happens next is going to show you what quiet power really looks like. From the sidewalk beyond the estate's perimeter, a jogger slowed to a walk, earbuds dangling as she pulled out her phone. The confrontation at the gates had drawn her attention, not because it was loud, but because it was wrong in a way that made her skin crawl. Her thumb found the record button without conscious thought. "This is wild," she whispered to her phone's camera, angling it to capture the standoff. "Dude's getting blocked from his own driveway." Malik heard the comment carry on the evening breeze and felt something shift inside his chest. Not embarrassment. He was long past caring about witnesses to his dignity being questioned. But awareness. This moment was being documented, preserved, shared with the world in real time. Good. He reached into his jacket, movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out his phone. The device was sleek, custom, with a titanium case that reflected the dying sunlight like a mirror. His thumb moved across the screen with practiced efficiency, finding a contact labeled simply Carla, priority. The call connected on the first ring. "Mr. Washington?" Carla Hendricks' voice came through crisp and clear, carrying the competence that made her worth every penny of her 6-figure salary. "You're not scheduled to return until tomorrow evening." "Change of plans," Malik said, his voice carrying across the courtyard with deliberate volume. "I need you to activate the residential verification protocol, full system override." Darius's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the clipboard like it was a life preserver in rough seas. "Sir, you can't just call someone and—" "Override code Delta 7-7 Washington," Malik continued, ignoring the interruption. "Property address 157 Magnolia Heights Drive, Beverly Hills. Execute immediately." Through the phone's speaker, the sound of rapid keystrokes filled the air. Carla's voice returned moments later, all business. "Override initiated, Mr. Washington. Accessing residential security database now." A mechanical hum began to emanate from the gate's control system, followed by a series of electronic beeps that made Jackson jump like he'd been startled awake. The main security panel, mounted on a brushed steel post beside Darius, began to glow with activity, screens flickering to life, LED indicators shifting from red to amber to green in rapid succession. Rodriguez backed away from the panel as if it might explode, his radio suddenly forgotten in his hand. "What the hell is—" His words were cut off by a voice from the system speakers, clear and authoritative as a judge reading a verdict. "Identity verification complete. Malik Washington, verified owner and primary resident. Property registration confirmed. Authorization level, executive override. Welcome home, Mr. Washington." The silence that followed was deafening. Darius stared at the control panel like it had personally betrayed him, his mouth opening and closing without producing sound. The clipboard fell from his nerveless fingers, clattering against the pavement with a sound like breaking bones. Jackson's face had gone pale, his hand frozen halfway to his radio. "Holy shit," he whispered, the words barely audible but carrying perfect clarity in the stunned quiet. From her position on the sidewalk, the jogger's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Oh my God, did that gate just call him the owner? Yo, are you getting this?" She turned her phone toward herself, eyes wide with disbelief. They tried to block the actual owner from his own house. This is going viral, y'all. Behind her, other phones began to appear. A delivery driver parked across the street had stopped to watch, his device already recording. A woman walking her dog had paused at the intersection, thumb swiping to start her own video. The modern accountability network was activating, witnesses gathering with the instinct of journalists. Malik stepped out of his Bentley with fluid grace, straightening his jacket as his feet found solid ground. The movement was unhurried, controlled, carrying the weight of a man who had just been publicly vindicated by his own property's security system. "Carla," he said into the phone, his voice carrying clearly to the growing audience. "Please log this incident for the board review. Timestamp, 4:17 p.m. Personnel involved, Darius Mitchell, Jackson Torres, Elena Rodriguez. Security protocol failure resulting in owner lockout." "Logged and documented, sir," came the response. "Shall I notify legal?" "That won't be necessary, yet." Darius found his voice, though it cracked like ice under pressure. "Mr. Washington, there must have been some miscommunication. The corporate directive was very clear about enhanced protocols." "The corporate directive?" Malik interrupted, his tone sharp enough to draw blood, "was never intended to apply to property owners, unless you're suggesting that your corporate office issued specific instructions to deny me access to my own home?" The question hung in the air like a sword over Darius's head. Around the perimeter, phones continued to record, capturing every word, every gesture, every moment of a man reclaiming his dignity through sheer force of will. Rodriguez cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. "Boss, maybe we should." "Should what?" Darius snapped, his authority crumbling in real time. "The protocols are clear. We verify everyone." "Even the owner?" The jogger called out from the sidewalk, her phone still recording. "Even when your own system just confirmed he lives there?" Malik pocketed his phone and took a step toward the gate, which began to swing open with a soft mechanical whisper. The sound was beautiful, normal, exactly as it should be, exactly as it always had been until today. "The gates recognize me, Darius," he said quietly. "The question is, why don't you? Share this with someone who needs to see what happens when quiet dignity meets loud ignorance. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button, because these stories of triumph don't tell themselves." The words came out with the finality of a gavel striking wood, each syllable carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I'm terminating the service of every member of this security team, effective immediately." The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. Rodriguez's radio slipped from his hand, hitting the pavement with a plastic crack that echoed like a gunshot. Jackson's mouth fell open, his face cycling through disbelief, panic, and the dawning realization that his mortgage payment had just evaporated into the autumn air. Darius's clipboard joined Rodriguez's radio on the ground, papers scattering in the breeze like leaves from a dying tree. "Mr. Washington, you can't. There are procedures." "Procedures." Malik's voice carried the ice of a man who had built empires by understanding exactly when procedures mattered and when they were simply obstacles to justice. "Like the procedure that should have prevented you from questioning my right to enter my own property?" He moved with deliberate precision, each step measured and purposeful as he approached the now open gate. The crowd of phone-wielding witnesses tracked his movement like satellites following the sun, their cameras capturing every moment of a master class in controlled power. The wrought iron barrier, which had stood between him and his sanctuary minutes earlier, now seemed insignificant, a minor inconvenience rather than the symbol of exclusion it had become. But Malik didn't rush through. Instead, he paused at the threshold, letting the moment breathe, letting the weight of what was happening settle into the consciousness of everyone present. "Sir, please," Jackson stammered, his young voice cracking under the pressure. This was just a misunderstanding. We were following orders. Whose orders? Malik's question cut through the air like a scalpel. Show me the corporate directive that specifically instructed you to deny entry to property owners. Show me the memo that told you to ignore your own security system's verification. Show me anything that justifies what happened here today. The silence stretched. No papers were produced. No explanations materialized. Because there were none that would survive scrutiny. Rodriguez found his voice first, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. There wasn't, the directive was general. Enhanced screening for all vehicles during security alerts. Enhanced screening for all vehicles, Malik repeated, his tone making each word sound like evidence in a trial. Except that directive was never meant to apply to residents, was it? It was meant for visitors, delivery personnel, service workers, people who don't belong here. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, visible and choking. Around the perimeter, phones continued recording, documenting the real-time deconstruction of institutional bias disguised as policy. Malik stepped fully through the gate, his feet finding the familiar stone pathway that led to his front door. The sensation was both triumphant and melancholy. A homecoming tainted by the knowledge that home was not the sanctuary he had believed it to be. Standing on his own property, surrounded by gardens he had personally designed and architecture he had personally approved, Malik felt the ghost of every other time he had been forced to prove his right to exist in spaces others took for granted. The memory came unbidden. Harvard Business School, 1998. Standing outside the lecture hall after a particularly brutal presentation on venture capital markets. Professor Williams pulling him aside, voice pitched low with concern and condescension in equal measure. Malik, I just want you to know that we have resources available. Academic support, tutoring services. Sometimes students from different backgrounds need extra help adjusting to the rigor of our curriculum. He had stood there, diploma from Northwestern in economics, summa cum laude, burning like a brand on his resume, listening to a white professor assume his presence was charity rather than merit. The same assumption that had followed him through job interviews, board meetings, country club applications. The persistent, grinding expectation that he prove not just competence but worthiness. This isn't about following orders, Malik said, his voice carrying across the courtyard with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. This is about assumptions, about seeing a black man in casual clothes and automatically categorizing him as a threat rather than a resident, about letting bias masquerade as security protocol. Darius's face had gone ashen, beads of perspiration forming along his hairline despite the cool air. Mr. Washington, if you could just give us another chance. Another chance to do what? To remember that you work for me? To recall that this is my home? Malik's tone remained level, controlled, but underneath ran a current of steel forged by decades of similar encounters. How many chances should I give you to treat me with basic human dignity? The question echoed across the courtyard, carrying beyond the immediate audience to the growing crowd of witnesses documenting every word. Social media algorithms were already working, pushing the footage to timelines, trending hashtags beginning to form around keywords that would define this moment for years to come. Jackson took a tentative step forward, his youth making him brave in ways his experience hadn't yet taught him to regret. Sir, we can fix this. We can change the protocols, make sure it doesn't happen again. You're missing the point, Malik said, his voice gentle now, almost paternal. The protocols weren't the problem. The problem was the decision to apply them to me. The problem was assuming I was someone who needed to be screened, rather than someone who employed the screeners. He reached into his jacket again, this time producing a business phone, different from the personal device he had used earlier, sleeker, with the kind of security encryption that suggested conversations worth protecting. His fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. Carla, I need you to contact Washington Enterprises Human Resources immediately. Authorization for immediate termination of contracted security personnel at the Beverly Hills property. Effective date, today. Cause, violation of anti-discrimination policies and breach of professional conduct standards. Through the phone speaker, The sound of rapid keystrokes filled the courtyard. "Understood, Mr. Washington. Shall I initiate the search for replacement personnel?" "Yes. And Carla, make sure the replacement team undergoes comprehensive cultural sensitivity training. I don't want to have this conversation again." "Absolutely, sir. HR will have termination paperwork processed within the hour." Malik pocketed the phone and turned back to the three men who had, moments earlier, held the power to grant or deny him access to his own home. Now they stood diminished. Their authority revealed as illusion, their positions as temporary as morning frost. "I will not work with individuals who perpetuate a culture of exclusion," he said, his words carrying the weight of a man who had spent his entire life fighting against systems designed to diminish him. "Not in my companies, not on my properties, not in my presence." The decision wasn't born of anger, though anger would have been justified. It wasn't revenge, though revenge would have been understandable. It was principle, the recognition that some lines once crossed revealed character in ways that couldn't be unchanged by apologies or promises of reform. Rodriguez bent to retrieve his fallen radio, movements defeated and mechanical. "Mr. Washington, our families depend on these jobs. Isn't there some way?" "Your families," Malik interrupted, his voice carrying a sadness that cut deeper than anger ever could, "deserve better than jobs that require you to compromise your integrity. My family deserves better than security personnel who see threats where they should see homeowners." He looked past them toward the mansion that rose beyond the courtyard, its glass and steel surfaces reflecting the dying light of day. Home, finally, but changed now by the knowledge that even here, even surrounded by success and achievement and every marker of belonging, the old assumptions could still surface like poison in a well. "The gates will remain open until your replacements arrive," Malik said, his tone final as a closing argument. "You have 2 hours to collect your belongings and transfer access codes. After that, your credentials will be permanently deactivated." He turned toward his home, each step a reclamation of space and dignity that had been temporarily stolen but never truly lost. Behind him, the sound of defeat was measured in whispered conversations, scattered papers, and the electronic beeping of phones, documenting a masterclass in accountability. The reckoning was complete. The transformation was about to begin. The jogger's thumb hit "Go Live" on Instagram without hesitation, her voice breathless with the adrenaline of witnessing history in real time. "Y'all, I cannot believe what I just watched. This man just fired an entire security team for blocking him from his own house. His own house, and the system had to tell them who he was." Her phone screen began filling with viewer notifications. 10, 50, 200 people joining the stream in real time. Comments flooded the feed faster than she could read them. "Wait, what? He owns the place? This is exactly why I don't trust security companies. That's Malik Washington from Washington Enterprises. He's a billionaire. Nah, this can't be real. Recording everything now, BC, this is wild." Within minutes, screen recordings of her stream were being uploaded to TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. The delivery driver across the street had already posted his angle to his company's WhatsApp group, where it immediately got shared to family group chats across 3 states. By the time Malik's Bentley disappeared up the curved driveway toward his mansion, Mansion Gate was beginning to trend. Local news producer Maya Chen got the alert on her phone at 4:47 p.m., just as she was wrapping up a mundane city council meeting. The tip came through their community hotline. Black billionaire confronts racist security at Beverly Hills estate. She almost deleted it as clickbait until she saw the footage. "Cancel the council piece," she told her cameraman, already heading for the door. "We're going to Beverly Hills." Now, the crowd outside the estate had grown from curious joggers to a small gathering of neighbors, delivery workers, and social media content creators drawn by the algorithmic pull of viral content. Mrs. Patterson from 3 blocks down stood with her arms crossed, shaking her head in disgust. "I've known Malik for 8 years," she told anyone who would listen, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through worse. "That man donated the money for our community center renovation, fixed the streetlights on Elm when the city said there was no budget. And these fools questioned him like he was some criminal." A Uber Eats driver named Carlos, still wearing his thermal bag, had stopped to watch the aftermath. His own phone was recording as he provided Spanish-language commentary for his followers. "Hermano, this is why I document every delivery, every interaction, because people see the uniform, the car, whatever, and they make assumptions. But this man, he owned the whole block, and they still didn't recognize him." The estate's neighbor, Dr. Sarah Kim, emerged from her own property with a bottle of water and a knowing look. She'd watched the entire confrontation from her kitchen window, her own memories of being questioned at medical conferences still sharp after 20 years in practice. "Malik," she called out, as his figure appeared on the front steps of his mansion. "You handled that with more grace than I would have managed." He turned, offering a weary but genuine smile. "Grace is sometimes the only weapon we're allowed to use." Maya Chen arrived with her news crew just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the wrought iron gates that stood open now, symbolic and stark. The terminated security team had vanished, their shift supervisor already on scene to collect equipment and assess the damage to the company's reputation. "Mr. Washington," Maya called out, her press credentials visible, her camera crew maintaining respectful distance. "Maya Chen, Channel 7 News, could we have a moment of your time?" Malik considered the request, his eyes scanning the crowd that had gathered to witness his vindication. These were his neighbors, his community members, people who understood that what had happened here was bigger than one man's bad afternoon. "5 minutes," he said, walking toward the gate with the composed bearing of someone accustomed to public scrutiny. The interview was brief but devastating in its quiet power. Standing with his mansion as backdrop, Malik spoke with the measured tone of a man who had spent years learning to control his voice when others expected him to lose control. "Respect is earned by just actions," he said, his words carrying the weight of lived experience, "not by assumptions about who belongs where." What happened here today wasn't about security protocols. It was about a fundamental failure to recognize humanity when it doesn't match your expectations. The clip was online within an hour, shared across news networks and social media platforms. Mansion Gate was joined by "Respect Earned by Actions" and "Malik Washington Speaks." The story began trending beyond local markets, picking up national attention as viewers connected it to their own experiences with discrimination. Twitter exploded with reactions. @Civil Rights Now. When even billionaires get profiled, it shows how deep these biases run. Malik Washington just gave a masterclass in dignity under fire. Tech entrepreneur. Know Malik personally. This man revolutionized cloud computing and they questioned his right to enter his own home. Make it make sense. Y'all better start training your security teams on unconscious bias because this is 2024 and we're not tolerating this anymore. By 9 p.m., the story had been picked up by CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC. Legal analyst commentary began flowing about workplace discrimination, property rights, and the liability implications for security companies that allowed bias to masquerade as policy. But it was the personal stories that gave the incident its true power. Thousands of comments poured in from people sharing their own experiences. A Black doctor denied entry to the hospital where she worked night shifts. A Latino CEO questioned at the corporate headquarters he had founded. An Asian tech executive asked to show ID at her own product launch party. The hashtag #WhereDoIBelong began trending alongside the original story, creating a digital space for people to share moments when their presence in certain spaces had been questioned, doubted, or denied. Local Beverly Hills Councilwoman Janet Rodriguez issued a statement by 10 p.m. The city of Beverly Hills does not tolerate discrimination in any form. We are reviewing protocols for private security companies operating within city limits and will ensure appropriate training standards are maintained. The security company, Mid-States Protection Services, released their own statement an hour later. We are conducting a thorough investigation into today's incident and are implementing immediate retraining protocols for all personnel. We remain committed to providing professional, unbiased security services to all clients. But by then, the damage was done. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict, and the story had evolved beyond Malik Washington's personal experience into a broader conversation about bias, dignity, and the assumptions that shape human interactions. In living rooms across America, families watched the footage and had conversations they had been avoiding. Children asked why the man had been questioned at his own house. Parents struggled to explain systems of bias that persist despite progress. The story had become exactly what viral moments aspire to be. Not just entertainment, but education. Not just outrage, but opportunity for growth. The mahogany doors of Malik's private study closed with a soft click, sealing him away from the chaos of ringing phones, interview requests, and legal consultations that had consumed his evening. Here, surrounded by first-edition books and framed photographs chronicling 3 decades of achievements, he allowed himself the luxury of quiet reflection. The room felt different now. The same leather-bound volumes lined the shelves, the same awards caught the lamplight, but something fundamental had shifted in the hours since he had spoken those words at the gate. "I'm terminating the service of every member of this security team." He settled into the wingback chair that had belonged to his grandfather, a man who had worked double shifts at the steel mill for 43 years and never owned a home with gates. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had inherited furniture from a man who would have been turned away from neighborhoods like this one. The photograph on his desk drew his attention, as it always did in moments of contemplation. His mother, Eleanor Washington, in her nursing school graduation gown, 1967. She stood alone in the picture. No family could afford the trip to witness her achievement, but her smile radiated the kind of quiet triumph that had shaped every lesson she taught her son. "Malik," she had said, her voice gentle but steel-reinforced, during one of their late-night conversations when he was 12 and struggling with yet another teacher who saw a problem before potential. "They're going to question you your whole life. Question your grades, your dreams, your right to be in certain rooms. But here's what they'll never understand. Every time they question you, they give you an opportunity to prove them wrong." The memory crystallized into focus, sharp and immediate. 8th grade, Roosevelt Middle School on Chicago's South Side. He had qualified for the advanced mathematics program, the only black student in a class of 32. Mrs. Davidson, the program coordinator, had pulled his mother aside after the first week. "Mrs. Washington, I'm concerned that Malik might be in over his head. The curriculum is quite rigorous, and students from certain backgrounds sometimes struggle with the adjustment. Perhaps the regular track would be more appropriate." His mother had listened with the patience of someone accustomed to coded language, her hands folded in her lap, her expression pleasant and unreadable. When Mrs. Davidson finished, Eleanor Washington had smiled, the kind of smile that preceded devastation. "Mrs. Davidson, my son earned his place in this program through merit, not charity. He will remain in advanced mathematics. What I'd like to discuss is what additional support you'll provide to ensure he excels, since that appears to be your concern." Malik had stayed in the program. He had graduated as valedictorian, and Mrs. Davidson had never again suggested that any student's background predetermined their potential. The lesson had been seared into his consciousness. When faced with assumptions about your limitations, your response should be to exceed every expectation they never thought to set. But tonight, sitting in a study worth more than Mrs. Davidson's annual salary, Malik realized that exceeding expectations wasn't enough anymore. The system that had questioned his 8th grade mathematics ability had evolved, put on better clothes, learned subtler language, but it was still there, still questioning, still assuming. It was time to change the system itself. He reached for his phone, dialing a familiar number. Dr. Patricia Williams answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. "Malik, I saw the news. Are you all right?" Williams had been his mentor at Harvard Business School, one of the few professors who had never looked surprised by his academic performance. In the years since, she had built the most respected diversity and inclusion consulting firm on the East Coast. "I need your help with something," he said, his voice carrying the certainty of a decision already made. "I want to create a foundation, something that addresses the root cause of what happened today, not just the symptoms. Tell me more." For the next hour, they discussed structure, mission, scope. By the time he hung up, the framework for the Gatekeepers of Justice Foundation had taken shape. a comprehensive program that would revolutionize how security personnel were trained, hired, and held accountable. The initiative would be threefold: mandatory cultural competency training for all security professionals, scholarships for underrepresented communities interested in security careers, and a certification program that would become the industry gold standard. But more than training, it would be transformation. 3 weeks later, Malik stood before a packed auditorium at the Beverly Hills Community Center, facing an audience that represented the full spectrum of his neighborhood: homeowners and service workers, longtime residents and recent arrivals, people whose only common ground was the understanding that what had happened at his gate could happen to any of them. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily to the back rows, "3 weeks ago, I was denied entry to my own home because 3 security guards made assumptions based on appearance rather than facts. Tonight, I want to talk about how we ensure that never happens to anyone again." The applause was immediate and sustained, but Malik raised a hand for quiet. "This isn't about punishment or revenge. This is about prevention. Because the truth is, discrimination doesn't require malicious intent. It only requires unchecked assumptions and the power to act on them." He clicked to the first slide of his presentation: architectural renderings of a sleek, modern facility under construction on the eastern edge of his property. "The Gatekeepers of Justice Training Center will open its doors in 6 months. Every security professional who works in this community will complete our certification program. But this isn't just about Beverly Hills. We're creating a model that can be replicated in communities across the country." Maria Santos, a housekeeper who had worked in the neighborhood for 15 years, raised her hand from the third row. "Mr. Washington, what happens to people like me? I get questioned at gates too, even though I've been cleaning the same houses for years." "That's exactly why this program exists, Maria. The training doesn't just cover racial bias. It addresses assumptions based on occupation, accent, clothing, age, anything that causes someone to be seen as other rather than neighbor." He clicked to the next slide, showing curriculum modules with titles like Recognizing Unconscious Bias, De-escalation Techniques, and Cultural Competency in Community Safety. "But training is just the foundation," Malik continued. "We're also creating accountability measures. Every certified security professional will carry a badge that connects to a database tracking their performance. Complaints, commendations, ongoing education, all documented and transparent." Dr. Jennifer Park, a pediatric surgeon who lived 6 blocks away, stood up. "How do we know this will actually change behavior and not just create more bureaucracy?" "Because we're not just changing what security guards learn. We're changing who becomes a security guard." Malik's voice carried the passion of someone who had spent sleepless nights working through every detail. "Our scholarship program will actively recruit from communities that have been over-policed and underprotected. Who better to understand the importance of respectful security than someone who has experienced its absence?" The presentation continued for another hour, covering partnership agreements with law enforcement, integration with existing community safety programs, and expansion plans for other metropolitan areas. But it was Malik's closing words that would be quoted in news articles for months afterward. "No barrier is too small if it stands in the way of dignity," he said, his eyes moving across the audience, making contact with faces that represented every demographic of American diversity. "Every gate, every checkpoint, every moment when someone's humanity is questioned, these are opportunities to get it right, to see people as they are, not as our assumptions tell us they should be." The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. 6 months later, the Gatekeepers of Justice Training Center opened to its first class of 43 students. The facility was a marvel of modern architecture and ancient wisdom. Solar panels and sustainable materials housing classrooms where the walls bore quotes from civil rights leaders, philosophers, and everyday people who had faced discrimination and chosen dignity over bitterness. One inscription, carved into the stone above the main entrance, captured the essence of Malik's transformation from victim to catalyst. "The measure of our character is not how we react when we are welcomed, but how we respond when we are not." Inside, Former gang members sat alongside college graduates, learning crisis de-escalation from retired police officers and cultural sensitivity from community leaders. The program was rigorous, comprehensive, and revolutionary in its approach to transforming an industry built on suspicion into a profession founded on service. The ripple effects extended far beyond security training. Other industries began adopting the gatekeepers model for their own bias reduction efforts. Universities incorporated the curriculum into criminal justice programs. Insurance companies offered premium reductions to clients who employed certified security personnel. What had begun as one man's confrontation with prejudice had become a nationwide movement toward accountability, understanding, and change. In his study late at night, surrounded by the same books and photographs that had witnessed his moment of reflection, Malik often returned to his mother's words about questions being opportunities. She had been right, as usual. The question at his gate had created the opportunity to transform not just his own experience, but the experiences of countless others who deserved to move through the world without having to prove their right to exist in it. 18 months later, the morning sun cast golden light across the same wrought iron gates that had once stood as barriers to dignity. But everything had changed. Marcus Thompson approached the security checkpoint with the confident stride of someone who understood that his job was service, not suspicion. The first graduate of the Gatekeepers of Justice program, he wore his certification badge with pride, a small silver pin that represented 6 months of intensive training in cultural competency, de-escalation techniques, and community engagement. "Good morning, Mr. Washington," Marcus said into his radio as the familiar Bentley approached. "Welcome home, sir." The gates opened smoothly, automatically, accompanied by Marcus's respectful nod and genuine smile. No questions, no clipboard, no assumptions, just professional courtesy extended to a man arriving at his own home. Malik nodded back through his window, a gesture that had become routine but never lost its significance. This was how it should have always been. This was how it would always be from now on. The transformation extended beyond individual interactions. The entire neighborhood had evolved, becoming a model for communities across the nation. Property values had actually increased as word spread about the revolutionary security protocols, attracting residents who valued dignity as much as safety. Dr. Sarah Kim, his neighbor, had sent Malik a text just that morning. "My elderly parents visited yesterday. Marcus helped them with their luggage and called them Mr. and Mrs. Park without being told their names. He looked them up in advance. This is what professionalism looks like." But the real measure of success wasn't found in Beverly Hills. It was scattered across 43 states, in communities that had implemented their own versions of the Gatekeepers program. Detroit, Phoenix, Charleston, small towns and major cities, all recognizing that security could be both effective and respectful. The invitation to speak at the Global Leadership Summit in Geneva had been unexpected but inevitable. Standing before an audience of world leaders, corporate executives, and social justice advocates, Malik delivered what many would later call the defining speech of his career. "Wealth," he began, his voice carrying across the Grand Assembly Hall, "does not insulate us from the effects of bias. Success does not shield us from discrimination. I learned this when I was denied entry to my own home, but I should have known it long before that moment." The audience of presidents, prime ministers, and Nobel laureates listened with the attention reserved for truths that challenge comfortable assumptions. When even those who have achieved the highest levels of success face questions about their right to exist in certain spaces, it reveals something fundamental about our global society. The problem isn't individual prejudice, it's systemic assumptions that persist regardless of evidence to the contrary. He clicked to a slide showing statistics from Gatekeepers certified facilities. 78% reduction in discriminatory incidents, 45% increase in community satisfaction ratings, 92% of certified security professionals reporting improved job satisfaction. But data tells only part of the story, Malik continued. The real transformation happens in moments like this. A young black engineer no longer holds her breath when entering the building where she works. A Latino grandfather doesn't face suspicion when picking up his grandchildren from school. An elderly Asian woman receives assistance instead of interrogation when she visits her son's gated community. The Swiss president, sitting in the front row, nodded slowly. She had been briefing her own security forces on unconscious bias training just weeks earlier. "The gate at my home is no longer a barrier," Malik said, building toward his conclusion. "It has become a symbol of possibility, proof that institutional change is achievable when we commit to seeing people as they are, rather than as our assumptions suggest they should be." The 15-minute standing ovation that followed would be remembered as one of the longest in the summit's history. Back in Beverly Hills, the ripple effects continued to expand. Maria Santos, the housekeeper who had spoken at that first community meeting, now served on the Gatekeeper's board of directors. Her insights about service worker experiences had shaped training modules used internationally. The local high school had added a Gatekeeper's internship program to its curriculum, giving students hands-on experience in conflict resolution and community service. College admission officers noted that applicants with Gatekeeper's experience consistently demonstrated maturity and cultural awareness beyond their years. 3 blocks away, the community center bore a new plaque, dedicated to the principle that every person deserves to be seen, respected, and valued for who they truly are, donated by the Gatekeepers of Justice Foundation. As evening approached, Malik found himself on the stone terrace overlooking his property, a ritual that had become sacred in the months since the incident. The same autumn air that had carried Darius's questioning voice now carried the sounds of children playing in the distance, neighbors calling greetings to the new security team, life continuing with dignity intact. The mansion itself had been featured in architectural magazines, not for its design, but for its symbolism. The gates that had once excluded now welcomed. The security checkpoint that had once interrogated now greeted. The property that had once been a source of pain had become a beacon of hope. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Williams. "Malik, the UN wants to discuss implementing Gatekeepers protocols in refugee processing centers. Your personal moment of injustice is becoming a global model for human dignity." He smiled, remembering his mother's words about questions being opportunities. She would have been proud to see how far that philosophy had traveled. The security booth glowed softly in the twilight, Marcus visible through the windows, reading rather than surveilling. On his desk was a copy of Between the World and Me, a signed reading for all Gatekeepers personnel. Education had become as important as enforcement. A delivery truck approached the gates, its driver probably nervous about entering such an exclusive neighborhood. Marcus emerged from the booth, walking toward the vehicle with a smile, his clipboard replaced by a tablet that prioritized welcome over suspicion. "Good evening," Malik heard him say. "How can I help you make your delivery efficiently and safely?" The transformation was complete, but the work continued. Phone calls from mayors seeking consultation, emails from security companies requesting certification partnerships, invitations to speak at universities, corporations, community centers. What had begun as one man's confrontation with prejudice had evolved into a movement that touched lives in ways he could never have anticipated. Every gate that opened with respect instead of suspicion. Every security guard who chose service over suspicion. Every community member who felt valued instead of questioned. The stars appeared overhead, the same stars that had witnessed his humiliation 18 months earlier. But the man who gazed up at them had been transformed by his decision to turn personal pain into collective progress. His phone rang, a call from São Paulo, where Brazilian officials wanted to discuss implementing Gatekeepers training in their favela security programs. The movement was truly global now. As he walked back toward his home, Malik reflected on the journey from that moment of being questioned at his own gate to this moment of being consulted by world leaders. The path hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Every person deserved to move through the world without having to prove their right to exist in it. That simple truth had become a global mission, spreading from one man's private pain to collective public progress. The gate stood open behind him, symbolic and permanent. No longer barriers to overcome, but portals through which dignity could flow freely. So here's my question for you. What would you have done in Malik's position? Would you have stayed calm or lost your temper? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story changed how you think about respect, dignity, and using your voice when it matters, share it with someone in your circle who needs to hear it. Stories like this spark real change, but only when we spread them.